The Sony a6000 was my very first photography camera, and it is very much one of the reasons why I am where I am with photography today. So let's take a look at this 11-year-old camera and see if it really deserves your attention now in 2023. Let's talk. The Sony a6000's body is made of entirely of plastic, but it is still a sturdy piece of gear. During my time with this one, I've bumped it, I've scratched it many times, and there's almost no sign of damage on this camera. Now, in terms of design, if you've seen one 6000 series body, you've pretty much seen them all, except the a6000 is the smallest of the bunch. Coming in at around 12 centimeters wide, 6.6 centimeters tall, and 4.5 centimeters deep at the grip point, it is really a compact camera, and that's why it can be a great travel shooter for, anyone looking for a small kit to take with them. There is no weather sealing though on the body, so that is a point away from the travel camera ability. For controls, we have your usual a6000 series stuff. So you have the power switch around the shutter button, you have a custom button on top of the grip, you have your mode dial and a freely adjustable dial on the top, and in the back we have a mechanical switch for the flash, a menu button, an AEL button, a function button, the button/wheel combination thing that Sony likes to use, with a center button, a playback button, and a second custom button. The movie button is the same 6000 series stupid location in the back right corner, but since you can assign movie recording to your shutter button, and you can forget that that button exists at all, there's your fix for that, whatever that is. Now, of all of those buttons, on top of the two custom buttons, the AEL, the center wheel button, and the left and right buttons can all be assigned to pretty much anything freely, which is pretty great to see. For connectivity, you have NFC on the right side of the body, which comes in handy when you want to use your phone and the IEM app for any sort of remote shooting capabilities. On the left side of the body, though, is this small hatch under which there is all the ports of the camera, a micro USB and micro HDMI. And of those, the micro USB does not support power delivery while the camera is on. So no unlimited run times here. But you can charge the battery through that micro USB port, so you don't have to get a separate battery charger. So that's okay. But as you can notice from that port selection, there is no headphone or microphone port on the camera at all. Considering this is what the microphone sounds like straight from the camera, you're gonna want to get an external microphone, like a lav, and connect it to your phone for some better audio. By the way, this is what the camera looks like, the 1080p, 24 frames per second, when using the kit lens. Now for a quick look, switching over to the Sigma 18-50 f2.8, you can definitely see that upgrading from the kit lens is definitely worth it. On the bottom of the a6000 is, in typical 6000 series fashion, the battery/SD card compartment. And the camera does use the NP-FW50 Sony battery, so it's rated for 360 shots. And in terms of video, don't worry about it. I'll tell you why in a second. But back on the back of the a6000 is the 1.44 million dot EVF. It's not great, but it does its job. You can see most of what you want, but every now and then I would find myself having to open up the photo on the display and zoom in to see if I really got what I was supposed to get. And that display being a 3-inch LCD with 921,600 dots, it follows the same suit. It's not great, but it gets the job done. Also, it is just a tilting screen, so there is no way to see yourself from the front with just the camera's basic stuff alone. Sure, there's attachments and other sorts of solutions, but as stock, you're not going to be able to see yourself. On the front of the camera, behind the 16-50 kit lens, there is the 24.3 megapixel Sony APS-C CMOS sensor, and is paired with a Bionz X imaging processor. Now that might sound familiar and like every other Sony APS-C body, but that is very not true. Sony has iterated on the CMOS sensor many a times during the 6000 series lineup, and this is the most bare bones version, and it's especially not to be confused with the XMAR CMOS sensors. But let's see how it actually does in use. For photography, the a6000 has all the requirements to get great photos out of the camera, when paired with a good lens. I might sound like a broken record, but it just can't be emphasized enough. The camera offers you the sensor for it, but you need to upgrade away from the kit lens to get great photos. The lens is the most important part for good quality photos. And nowadays, with the Sony a6000, since it uses the Sony E-mount, you have a large selection to choose from. For example, the Sigma Sony E-mount lineup is stellar and it doesn't break the bank. So that is a fantastic option to pair with one of these. And since they are Sony E-mount lenses, they'll carry with you if you plan to upgrade to a better Sony camera later. So when shooting in good lighting conditions and paired with a good lens, the sensor really does deliver. The images are nice and sharp, and definitely good enough for any sort of hobbyist use, and I've even used some professionally as well. When lighting conditions take a dip though, something changes. Since when you need to up the ISO, the sensor is very, very sensitive to noise. Already at around 1600, you can definitely see visible noise in many parts of the photo. And the camera does offer you noise reduction capabilities, but it tends to take away too much of the detail that I would have liked to preserve. So instead, using something like On1's No Noise AI, I've been able to get those images to be noiseless and at least usable, if not good. There's also no stabilization in the camera whatsoever, so if you're shooting long exposures or with a long focal length, you're gonna want to be mindful of that and increase your shutter speed to what you need to. One thing that definitely should have been in the camera that is strangely absent is any sort of digital level. So you have no indicator of whether the shot is straight. Sure, you can turn on grids and then line up your shot, your horizon with the line in the grid, but just a digital level would be so much better. Now for autofocus, when shooting photos, the a6000 uses a hybrid autofocus system, combining both phase detect and contrast detect. Nowadays, that's nothing special, but back in the day, a big deal. And that autofocus system works pretty well. It's held up quite nicely. I did have it miss a few shots, so it's not as good as something like the a6400, but it still gets the job done 90% of the time. But now let's look at the video features. So for video, the a6000 can do 1080p up to 60 frames per second. So there's no 4K here, but considering the price point that it released and considering the age of the camera, I don't think anyone's going to be surprised. In terms of video features, it is very basic. So there's no log recording, there's no stabilization, and you're limited to 1080p, but at least you do get to adjust any sort of controls while you're shooting. So shutter speed, exposure, all of that can be changed on the fly. Now the 1080p video quality itself is still solid. So if you're looking for a camera for something like social media usage, the a6000 will be able to deliver. But if you want to be at the tippity top for like video quality, then you're gonna want to dish out like a couple hundred more to get the ZVE10 so that you have 4K video and you have stabilization. If you can afford it, then it's definitely a worthy upgrade. One great advantage that the camera does have though is that it has clean HDMI out. Now that means that it can be used for streaming very well. But there is a caveat to that as well. And that is due to overheating. Ah yes, just like the shining star upon a time, the A5100, the A6000 is terrible at overheating too. It doesn't really matter what the battery life for video is, the fact that it's supposed to be around 30 to 35 minutes. The camera will not be able to record continuously more than 15 to 20 minutes. Because, that's regardless of the conditions that you're in. It will overheat around that time and it will stop recording. There's no heat setting that you can adjust. It will just end. And that is even at 1080p 24 frames per second, not to mention 60 FPS. And going back to the use in streaming, I actually had the a6000 overheat on me while it was just outputting video display, not even recording. And that's just bad. So if you're planning on getting the camera for long form vlogging content, you're going to have a bad time. So like you can see here, since there's no stabilization, the footage is extremely shaky. And since I can't see myself, I'm guessing in terms of framing the shot. And on top of all of that, since the audio is garbage, it doesn't sound good. And while you're struggling with all of that, you're on a 15 to 20 minute timer because the camera is doing its best to overheat and shut itself down. So it's really not a vlogging camera. So is the Sony a6000 really worth getting in 2023? Well, if you're planning on getting it for vlogging content, no. But if you're getting it for social media usage and you don't need more than 15 minutes of runtime, the 1080p quality is stellar and will get you where you need to go as soon as you upgrade from the kit lens. But if you're planning on getting the Sony a6000 for photography, well now, paired with a good lens, you're getting good image quality for pretty cheap. Sure, the menus aren't the best out there, but you get used to them. At least I did. And in terms of menu systems, it is the old Sony menu system. No custom menu, no favorites, nothing. It's not great, but it gets the job done. But as soon as you do get used to the menus and you get a good lens and you have good lighting setup, you're going to get great results across the board for photography. Sure, getting great results won't be as easy with something like a newer, a more expensive camera that has stabilization, a better sensor, better noise handling, better ergonomics, better menus, all of that. But getting those features will most likely at least double the cost from this body. Sure, it's worth it, but not everyone can or wants to spend that much for something like this. Overall, the a6000 is a pretty great beginner camera or a cheap travel shooter. And if you're planning on getting your feet wet in social media, it can work for you as well. And it doesn't break the bank. Now these opinions hold up when we're talking about something like the $400 price range that you can find it new in some places. But it really breaks down if you go higher than that. But if you get lower than that, since if you're finding it used, I mean, it still holds up. If you want to check out the camera, it will be linked in the description below. That will be an Amazon affiliate link, so if you use it, that supports the stuff I do, so thanks. And if you have any questions, let me know in the comments below, or if you don't, just say hi, since that will tell Daddy YouTube that you love the content. Anyway, Have a great rest of the week, everyone, and I will see you all next time. Okay? Bye.